This is our first of the year brown bag talks. That's what we usually call them, or now I guess we're calling them GLC at lunch. We've done these for years. We've done hundreds of these, and we're proud today to do a very special one with the artist Dana King. And indeed, this is ultimately about her magnificent new creation, her new sculpture of William Lanson, which will be dedicated, unveiled and dedicated in just a couple of weeks here in New Haven. I want to say a quick word about the GLC, then I'm going to introduce this extraordinary panel and get out of the way for a little bit, and I'll come back in for some of the conversation and discussion. We welcome you to submit thoughts or questions on the chat, and we will be doing a Q&A at the end with anyone in the audience. So the GLC is now 22 years old. We are, for anyone who doesn't know, a research institute for sure. We are about giving fellowships and creating knowledge and doing scholarly panels and conferences, but we are also very much about public outreach, educational outreach, artistic outreach, and especially in the broadest possible realm of public history and public education. That's why this session is really quite special for us. We have more of these coming up in the coming days, coming weeks, I should say. And I think Tom Thurston, my colleague, may say a word at some point here about our program called Shared Histories, which is going on the next 4 weekends, also on this medium of good old Zoom. Never thought I'd call it good old Zoom. But anyway, I'll let Tom explain that. So without further ado, let me introduce our guests and get this discussion going. First, Dana King. Dane is a classical figurative sculptor who creates public monuments in bronze, and particularly public monuments about Blacks, or as she puts it, Black bodies in bronze. She first molds, as I understand it, although I'll let her explain her methods. She first molds these in clay with her hands, then converts to bronze, which to me is, as a non-artist, is actually a fascinating process. I am a student of monuments and I've seen a lot of them, but I have no idea how they're created. She tries to show, as she says in her work, how space can become power. And she makes a special point, I noticed, of the significance of research by an artist before doing one of these, before creating one of these. I find that fascinating. I can't wait to hear about that. How do you do that? She also sees her monuments linking generations, linking people over time with their past. That is indeed what monuments can do and should do. And in every way, as we will see, she is about creating memory, preserving memory, creating memory, reforging memory, which is a huge question, of course, in our society. Our other guests are Charles Warner Jr. Charles is a native of New Haven. He grew up in the Beaver Hill neighborhood, went to Hill High School, and then he went on to Morehouse College in Atlanta. He's a proud Morehouse man. There are a lot of them. And if you haven't met one, you are now. He was a sociology major at Morehouse. He is currently a behavior specialist in the New Haven Public Schools. He's a member of and involved with the historic Dixwell Congregational Church, a famous church in New Haven. He's on the board of directors of the Amistad Committee, and he's the current chair of the Connecticut Freedom Trail. And next we have Kai Perry, who's a longtime board member of the Amistad Committee. Those of you who may not be aware of the Amistad Committee are about to become very aware of the Amistad Committee. We at the GLC have been involved on and off with the Amistad committee, its effort, the schooner, its education projects for actually many years now. And it's actually great to renew that relationship, I must say. Her hometown was Toledo, Ohio. She has sailed on the schooner La Amistad as both a deckhand and as an educator, which is, of course, the purpose of that great replica ship built just up the coast here. She's on the board of directors of the Amistad Committee. She's an adjunct professor at the University of New Haven. She also works at Yale, and she's currently a doctoral candidate in educational psychology at UConn. And last but not least, my colleague, Tom Thurston, who has been with the center now almost as long as I have. I think I'm 16 years now as director, something like that. And I hired, one of the best things I ever did is hired Tom, I guess it was the second year, as our education director. Tom does many, many things for our center, but it's primarily all of our efforts in educational outreach to teachers, to students, to the community. And indeed, I must mention, in 2 occasions, multi-year teacher institutes with 3 different countries in Africa, with also the UK, and then of course with teachers here. We did a institute back in about 09 and 10. I may have those years wrong, Tom, with Ghana, the UK, and the US, combining teachers on the broad subject of the Atlantic slave trade. And then we just did one the past couple of years with teachers from Johannesburg, South Africa, and Sierra Leone, and Connecticut teachers on the broad problem of post-conflict societies and shared histories. For those efforts, particularly those international teacher institutes, Tom was just awarded this past year an annual award from the Connecticut Council of Social Studies for special service, special public service. And we're very proud of Tom for that. He finally got recognition for all of this kind of quiet, often invisible work he does with teachers all over the state of Connecticut, and for that matter, now all over the world. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Tom to begin this conversation. And we want this to be a rich conversation. Have it out, folks. Let's understand, first of all, Dana King's work. But let's get after this question of why monuments and memorials are, once again, in our culture, so important. So Tom, I'll hand it over to you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, David. David Blight, of course, is the director of the Gilder Lehrman Center, is a sterling professor of history at Yale University, and is the author of many books, including just recently Frederick Douglass, An American Prophet of Freedom, and which won the Pulitzer Prize for History in 2019. So we really appreciate you joining us in this. And I do want to kind of go immediately to Dana King and hear a little about, your process, Dana, and some of the things that have kind of motivated you to get into this line of creating public works of sculpture. And I want to let the group out there know is that you're located in Oakland, California. I have family out in the Bay Area. I'm really happy to be there. And I assume as we speak, the sky is an odd shade of orange right now. I'm sorry about that. But Dana, how are you?
I'm very good. Thank you very much. I haven't been outside yet today. The air quality is a little worse than it was yesterday. Even though the color has changed, it's now just a white sky that's obliterated the sun. So I wish you all good health and safety during this time. And I'm very grateful to be here to talk about Mr. Lanson. I believe that African descendants have a right to their memories and a right to seeing those memories out in public. It's my hope that especially young people can see work of African descendants and see themselves in it, and see their parents and their grandparents and and their aunts and uncles, and to know that they matter, that their history is as important as it's considered in American history as all the other elements of American history. And that's my goal, and that's my mission. And I only create sculptures of African descendants. I came to sculpture late in life. I'm in my third career. And I've been at it for the last 10 years. And so I have the luxury, I have the privilege to pick and choose what I care to create. And when I found out about the Lanson sculpture and was invited to create a sculpture of him, I had already done a lot of research on him. I went up to the Mormon temple and tried desperately to look for photographs of him or information around his description. There was nothing about him, his brothers, his children, and I've read as much as I can to date about him. I will continue to learn about Mr. Lanson going forward. I feel like he's family to me now. He was in my studio for such a long time as I created him. But that's integral to my work. It's foundational. I need to know as much as I can so that I can start to feel their presence and feel who that person was. Beyond just the research, kind of taking the aggregate information and compiling this composite person. That's really vital to my work. And as David Blight said, that I create my sculptures from clay. I create them just with these two hands. I am not technically adept at this whole computer business. I'm grateful to sculpt the old-fashioned way, if you will, and then to turn the piece into bronze, we use the ancient practice of the lost wax art process, and it's been used since the beginning of time. It hasn't really changed, and a mold is made of my piece. Wax is poured into that mold. A wax replica is made. It's then dipped into this silicate that concretizes, and then they're able to pour the molten bronze 2,000 degrees into this new mold, and it sits for a week or so, and they crack open the mold, they break it open, and there are the pieces in bronze that are then welded together, and which is the process we're in right now. Mr. Lanson is being welded together. He's almost finished. He'll be right on time, and then the patina is applied to him. And I've been thinking about how to colorize him. So that's been, I go to sleep thinking about it. I wake up thinking about it, and I won't really know what he's ultimately going to look like until that moment that we actually start to apply the patina mixes. So that's the process.
Well, thanks. And we're I want to hear more about it, but first I want to Kai, if you could unmute. I want to ask you about say a little about the Amistad Committee, but what was the process involved in kind of conceptualizing this statue to William Lanson, and then the whole process of going about searching for a sculptor and meeting with Dana.
Sure. Well, should I say a little bit about just the committee in general?
Or? Please do.
Okay, so the Amistad Committee, for those folks who don't know, is established in 1988. We're in our 32nd year now of operation, and we were established really in honor of the original Amistad Committee that came to the aid of the Amistad Africans who were illegally kidnapped and jailed here in New Haven, Connecticut. but it was abolitionists and missionaries and who came together in Connecticut to raise the money to get the Amistad Africans to return safely home, and also help pay for their legal aid that helped them ultimately win this case. And so Al Marder, who's the president of of the Amistad Committee, he thought, I mean, what more appropriate thing to do than to reinstitute this Amistad Committee today to continue to memorialize and acknowledge the contributions that Africans and African Americans have made to Connecticut and this country. And so that's what we do. And over the years, we've hosted hundreds of lectures, workshops. We actually, in 1992, erected our first statue of Sangbe, PA, which is right in the exact spot that the Amistad Africans were jailed in New Haven, Connecticut, right in front of City Hall there. And so we're just continuing this work, and it seems to be even more and more important today. It was about 7 years ago when we decided that we would like to create some public art to memorialize William Lanson. We had created a document, an actual publication that was distributed widely about William Lanson's life and his contributions to New Haven, but we thought that just wasn't enough. And so we started conversations with the former mayor of New Haven about what we could do. As with many cities and city budgets and changing of hands, it just got delayed over the years, and raising the money and trying to figure out which location would be appropriate really took some time. And so finally, we have agreed upon a space. We have agreed upon all the logistics, including the finances. And then once we got those things in place, we were like, okay, we can finally look for an artist. And so I was fortunate enough to be involved in that process as well, where members of the Amistad Committee worked with city officials, and we would sit about, once a month over a year, trying to figure out who would be the best person to create this statue. The statue of a man that we couldn't find any photographs of. Who would understand the significance of this man's presence here in New Haven, right? So we didn't just want someone who was a good artist, right? We needed someone who understood the power of this man's story being placed here in this community, a very diverse community as New Haven is, right? And so, to be frank, we got a lot of responses from different artists, but we were concerned about, we thought it was important that it be a person of color, just to be frank.
Yeah.
And one, because we wanted to support the work of another artist of color, right? But two, we thought that more than likely they would have a sense of sensitivity and sensibility to the entire story of not just creating this statue, but of really kind of starting a movement of some sort and creating a space for people to gather and to feel proud of their history, right? So we needed a person who could get all of that. And so Dana, it was a unanimous vote. Out of all the applicants, Dana King was our first choice. Our first round, we didn't even reach her. She didn't hear about us, our first round. Mm-hmm. And we said, we had some good artists, but we said, no, we're not excited about an artist yet. And so we sent it back out. And in the second round of applicants, we got Dana And it was, like I said, it was unanimously decided at that point.
Thanks. And before we kind of open things up, I want to ask my fellow Amistad Committee member. I just recently joined the committee. I'm very honored to be a part of this great community organization that really does span nearly 200 years if you kind of see us as a continuation of that original committee. So it's a great honor. But Charles, if you could unmute, I'd like to know like why William Lanson? Tell us something about the man that Dana kind of had to put that man in clay. I mean, who was William Lanson? What is his?
Well, William Lanson has been a prominent figure in New Haven's history since his being alive and being active. Prominent and then controversial, I'll say. Over the years, he's been talked about, obviously, in his time. After his death, there were still articles being written about him, like in the 1890s by people who would have known him, elderly people who would have known him. Then again, the African-American columnist who was a columnist for the New York Age, Daniel Stewart, wrote about William Lanson. Then on up until the 1990s when Gary Highsmith at the New Haven Teachers Institute did some work on William Lanson. The Amistad Committee sent out a request to have a full research project done on the life of William Lanson, and Dr. Catherine Harris wrote a wonderful work on the life of William Lanson, and Peter Hanks is another well-known Lanson scholar. So throughout the ages, William Lanson has been a popular figure. Lanson came to New Haven in the first decade of the 1800s, and he came with family members. And as soon as they got to New Haven, they purchased land from Mary Worcester. Obviously, that's why Worcester Square is named Worcester Square, because Mary Worcester owned that land originally. But the Lanson brothers purchased land in that area from Mary Worcester. And they were able to create businesses like a hostelry for horses. And, you know, they owned about 100 horses, and they made fancy carriages for the wealthy to ride in. And eventually, William Lanson moved into housing and building suitable housing for New Haven's underserved Black population who were scattered to the edges of the city and you know, squalid conditions. And he went on to open up what he called a hotel, and people were able to come there and congregate and stay there. And there was a tavern associated with the place, and he was into oyster business, the oyster, like aquaculture. And we also know that he quarried stone and ran a quarrying business. And then not only did he quarry stone, he used those stones to build, at the time, all the bridges in East Haven were built by Lanson. He extended the wharf down in the New Haven Harbor, and that's why it's called Long Wharf. And what that did, by him creating Long Wharf, he was able to, well, the city was able to capitalize on bigger ships coming in and allowing them to stay in deep water. So it increased trade with other nations and other states. And so William Lanson also extended, he did about 30 miles worth of work on the Farmington Canal from New Haven, 30 miles, I guess that would be north. And he did that with a team of African Americans, many of whom were runaways from the South and needed work. One of those people was the well-known escaped slave William Grimes. So Lanson was a talented man, came from a community of folks. You know, a lot of times when people talk about Black men from Lanson's time, they're an anomaly, or they're usually the beneficiary of some kind, wise, wealthy white person. And I know for sure that William Lanson definitely did have the backing of, you know, some prominent white people who recognized his talents and strengths. Well, William Lanson came from a family and a community that schooled him and I'm sure made it clear to him that he had just as much of a stake as being a citizen in this country as anyone else. There's other work currently, still research being done on the life of William Lanson, and some of the newest information is that Lanson's father was a Revolutionary War veteran, and his brothers were distinguished people in the community. Lanson wasn't just like a good entrepreneur or a talented individual. He also was a community builder, a founding member of the African Ecclesiastical Society that was a group of people that came together basically to better the lives of Blacks in the area. Simeon Jocelyn was a white became a theology student, but a white engraver who just felt like, you know, it was against what God wanted for Black people to be mistreated and treated, you know, as subhumans. And Simeon Jocelyn nurtured the African Ecclesiastical Society, and that group basically went on to create most of the institutions that Black people had in the city at the time. And the African Ecclesiastical Society still exists in some form to this day in the form of the Dixwell Church, which is 200 years old. William Lanson was there at the beginning of that, and his family members also. So he's contributed much to African-American life in the city and to the development of New Haven, period, and the state.
Right, and I want to add that, is it Charles, maybe too modest to say, but he's a church historian at the Dixwell Church, which is wonderful. But Dana, so all of this, so having you know, a prominent person like this who there are no images, either photographs or graphics or anything like that, how then did you go about, you know, with everything, all the ways that Charles has described this man, you know, what was your process in kind of like, how do you put a face to a person who's kind of, his individual self has been lost to us through the years?
Excuse me, before I get into that, I want to say, with regard to what Kai mentioned about the process of selecting a sculptor, I found out about this from Regina Mason, who is a descendant of William Grimes, who wrote about his life. And she contacted me and told me about this. And that's how I came to even know that there was a potential sculpture commission for the life of William Lanson. So the connections and the threads are amazing.
Awesome.
Now you're part of the New Haven, the extended William Lanson community.
Right.
David?
And Regina is here.
Yeah, she's in the Northern California. I just wanted to quickly add, when the William Grimes narrative was put back in a modern edition by Bill Andrews, an important scholar of slave narratives, we brought Regina here. The GLC brought her here with actually Bill Andrews. We did a whole session about it. She brought family members. We showed her Grimes's gravesite. That's the first time she actually saw it, which is right over here in Grove Street Cemetery. And that's at least 10 years ago, Tom, maybe 12 years ago. But yeah, so we have this connection with Regina as well. That's amazing. Anyway, just wanted to put that.
Okay, we're all
the
family.
Platinum thread that continues to run between us.
Yeah.
But the character of Mr. Lanson that struck me was, here was this man, obviously very intelligent, and when he built out the Long Wharf, I mean, he made a lot of money doing that. $25,000 he was paid back in 1810. And he chose to use that money, not to lift himself up and to make his life more fabulous and opulent, but he used that money to build housing and create community for African descendants and poor whites. And he built an integrated neighborhood. So I saw this man as one of 800 free men in New Haven at the time. And slavery wasn't abolished in Connecticut until 1848, and Lanson died in 1851. So here was this free Black man who was elected the Black governor, King Lanson, and held that position from 1825 to 1830. So every time he stepped out publicly, he represented the community. And so he had to be very put together, an impeachable presence, if you will, from his hair down to his boots and everything in between. And yet he still was not seen as a man, as a whole man. And so he went about this building of community, and the work that he did, his entrepreneurial spirit, which is extensive and incredible. And he fought for the rights of African descendants, both free and enslaved. He spoke to the state legislature. He wrote the legislature. He put himself out there and put himself in danger every day because he dared to speak so profoundly, so deeply, so earnestly about the role that we play in history. And at any moment in time, he could have had that snatched from him, his wealth, his prosperity, his houses, his hotel, his access to those who were prominent in the white community. He could have had that taken from him. And ultimately he did. You know, society decided that he was too powerful. He had too much money. He had too much access, too much power. And they took it. They took it all. And they charged him with ridiculous things, running a house of ill repute, if you will. The man was deeply Christian. He was married. He had a family. It's just an outrageous and humiliating charge against someone who was so upstanding. So I say all this to say that the sculpture that I created is of a man who's in a very formal pose. His chest is out. His shoulders are back. He's carrying his top hat, and he is owning his space, because that's what William Lanson did. And by him owning his personal space, he allowed others to step into the light and to feel and to know that they were important within their own community. And if that could move outward and into the white community, then it would just be so powerful. But he allowed people to feel a sense of pride about the work they did, about the spaces they held and contained, and about who they were. And so that's why when you see the sculpture of William Lanson, you'll notice just how he carried himself. And that was really important to me, to create that vision of his own personal power and his own confidence and his own knowledge in what he brought to the table and how he carried that for other people.
Yeah,
I hope you'll see.
And I should note that that during the process of creating this statue, George Floyd was murdered, and so that kind of brought this all together. And I know you reached out to us and had a change to make. Could you say a little about that?
Yeah, so George Floyd died during the process of me, was murdered while I created William Lanson, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, And you know, many others were violently assaulted in this country, and protests were, you know, everywhere. And I couldn't leave. I needed my protest to be William Lanson. And so the sculpture, I said he's carrying his top hat with one hand, and his other hand is placed on his thigh. He's got his leg propped up on a stone, and his hand was just loosely planted on his thigh. And I thought, you know, Mr. Lanson fought for freedom in the 1800s, and he was an activist in every sense of the word. And he endured the danger of doing that every time he spoke. In fact, every time he stepped out of his house, he was an activist. And I thought, you know, if he were alive today, he would be with us. He would participate in these protests. He would be as hurt and disturbed and angry and frustrated as we all are. And I also thought, my God, he died 169 years ago, and we are still fighting this fight. And so that placement of his hand, first of all, I wrote to Al Marder, who's the founder of the Amistad Committee and is still, is he the president? I don't know the hierarchy. The spiritual leader.
Yes.
Very much so.
At 98 years old.
Al is a force of nature. He's a force of nature, actually.
For sure.
He is. He is. I cannot wait to meet him, and I just want to hug him, and I won't be able to, but I'll give him the elbows, right? But so I wrote to Mr. Marder, and I said all those things, and I said that I really want that hand that's placed on his thigh to be a fist, because the movement of the hand from Mr. Lanson's thigh to the air would be this. And I asked him if I could change his hand to a fist. And Mr. Marder wrote me back and he said, do it. If you know him, you know that that's exactly what he said, right? He said, do it. He said, because I want some young person to come up to the sculpture and look up at Mr. Lanson and ask, why is his hand in a fist? He doesn't look angry, so why is his hand in a fist? And so that was my ode to Black power, Black pride, Black Lives Movement, Black Lives Matter, Black excellence. And I'm so grateful that the Amistad Committee said yes to that. Because to me, William Lanson is our connection to the past and the thread that still exists today of the issues that we're fighting for and dealing with and dying over. So that's what that fist means.
You know, getting back to the memorial to the Amistad rebels, which is out in front of City Hall, right across from the New Haven Green. That's the gathering site here in New Haven for any kind of protest, any kind of struggle, you know, against injustice. It's so often people will meet there. I myself have been in front of that statue, and I think, you know, that's something that you kind of hope for, but for it to happen is just an amazing thing. And, you know, we're really hoping to have that kind of, and I think you're just the person to be doing this, to have that kind of presence right where it is, which is right kind of on the crossroad, on the where Yale and the community of New Haven kind of meet. And, you know, with that, David, if you could say a few words about what, with this, the protests in support of Black lives and the way in which monuments have been such a part of that. I mean, how does this speak to the current moment?
Yeah, well, first of all, I wanted to just comment on what Dana just said about the fist. That's amazing. And, you know, it shows that making sculpture, though in the end they are seemingly fixed, you know, forever in bronze or something, they're not static. The creation of this was a process for you, and it had changes. But you also reminded me of one of the earliest photographs we have of Frederick Douglass. I don't think it's the earliest, but it's one of the earliest. He is sitting, and he has both his hands in front of him, but both hands are in fists. Now, interpreters have looked at that and said, that's Douglass making a fist, or who, I don't know. You know, you can interpret it different ways, but there they are, you know, it's like very visible. It's like he's lifted his hands up in front of himself and he's showing two fists. Again, I can't for sure know what exactly Douglass was doing there. It's possible his hands were cold, I don't know. But you just reminded me of that. I don't, you know, a lot can be said to that question, Tom. We're in a process, though, that clear about memorialization in this country, especially as it has to do with slavery, race, and the Confederacy, that is much older than George Floyd, although it certainly got exploded in our faces in the wake of that. The modern problem with monuments here really began, well, it's an old problem, but it really began with the massacre in Charleston. The massacre of 9 African Americans in Emmanuel AME Church. In the wake of that, of course, the Confederate flag at least came down in South Carolina. But there was a concerted effort to challenge all things Confederate in the wake of that. Then again, after Charlottesville in 2017, same thing, because the whole Charlottesville march, as it's sometimes called, was about trying to preserve a Robert E. Lee monument in Charlottesville. And now we're in like, whatever it is, chapter 3 of this modern challenge to the presence of the Confederacy on our landscape, to the presence of slaveholders on our landscape, to the presence of a kind of white supremacist memorialization that came out of the problem of the memory of the Civil War. Where exactly this is going remains to be seen, but the most telling thing of all this summer was how many Confederate monuments were either challenged, attacked, or removed, or reconfigured by artists. Like the Lee Monument on Monument Avenue in Richmond, you know, has been painted over, it's been used, it's that imagery projected. It's now its own kind of new protest monument. It's interesting. Whereas a couple others have been literally taken down. We don't know where this is going. Will all Confederate monuments end up being eliminated? Probably not. There's 1,700 of them. And some of them are often little corners of villages and towns, and hardly anyone seems to care. And of course, some of them are in cemeteries, which is another matter. You know, do you remove things that are in cemeteries? That's an open question. I, for one, don't support removing monuments in cemeteries if it's possible. But there's also an effort now, and it's a hotly debated problem. We don't hear a lot about it in the press because there's just so much else to be concerned about in Washington, D.C. There's a bill before Congress to reconsider and perhaps remove Confederate monuments from Civil War battlefields. That's a hotly contested issue right now among a lot of people. But I think we are in one of the richest moments we've ever had, and that's, Dana, you are doing this at this moment. One of the richest periods we've ever had about truly rethinking, reimagining. What would an American, national and local, these things are always local as well as larger, what would a national American landscape about a memorial landscape about our history actually look like? How might we imagine a 21st century that will memorialize an American past differently, in new forms, in new places, about new stories that were not done in the 19th and the 20th century? It's an amazing opportunity if you think about it. I guess I'd just add, I like you, Dana, during this pandemic era, ever since last March, my teaching went online, my life went online, webinars, podcasts all the time, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I just took to writing op-eds too. I mean, I just felt like I got to do something, sitting here, what can I do? And you do it in your art. We do it in our teaching. I think teachers have become sort of citizen teachers in this process. Charles, you must feel that way. But I took to writing op-eds too. And one of the op-eds I wrote, I forget where now, I think it was the New York Times, is I suggested back in late July or early August that the Biden campaign get ahead of this issue. While Trump was out there blathering about saving Confederate monuments and not taking Confederate names off military bases, get ahead of this issue. Establish a WPA-like artistic commission, not to tell everybody what to do, not to determine what monument should go up in New Haven or in Houston, Texas, or anywhere else, but a commission created by the Biden campaign, and eventually, one can hope, the federal government, with resources now, money to seed artistic endeavor. You want people on this commission who are not just academics. You want artists on this commission. You want some political people on this commission. And you want some historians who've studied this process. You want art historians. But man, really create something big and creative, give it some resources, and announce to the world the United States is going to try to reimagine its memorial landscape. Now, I didn't get any calls from the Biden campaign. I had a lot of emails about it. In fact, I had people volunteering for the commission. They're writing to me and, I want to be on that commission. Do you know what we're creating here in this town? Do you know what there's all kinds of this energy out there. There are people doing this and doing that all over the country, and I've saved the emails, but we'll see. There's a lot of talk in the Biden campaign about WPA kind of, New Deal-like approaches to all these massive crises we face, including the economy. And as you would know, Dana, they're artists always looking for work, right? So, it's an opportunity as well as a dilemma, a crisis, a problem, but it's really an opportunity. And I guess one other quick thing I would say is, I would hope, again, I don't think there should be a commission that tells any locality what monument they should have and where necessarily. These things ought to emanate from regions, from towns, from where people live. But why not imagine new ways of doing this? New kinds of modern notions of what is a monument? New kinds of creativity, monuments to ideas, monuments to events, as well as to people. And man, have you all made a case here. Charles, Dana, Kai, for Lanson, because God, listening to you talk about him, we have all this talk about founding fathers in America, founders. This is a true founder of New Haven,
Yes.
The true founder of this town, a maker of this town. And it's something the whole state of Connecticut ought to be behind. New Haven is in some ways the place where the earliest history of Connecticut took hold. And clearly this is the beginnings of the Black community in New Haven. And by the way, one other quick thing, and then I'll pull right out of this again. Tom knows this. This is not very public knowledge yet. But I've been asked by the president of Yale, Peter Salovey, to chair a working group committee. We're not sure what it will precisely be called yet, It's going to be run by the GLC and chaired by me to study Yale University's 320-year history with slavery.
Good.
Now, the contours of this is to be determined. I'm trying to create a faculty and community working group. I'm trying to find the right graduate student research assistants. We're going to get over there in the archives and so forth. And we've even created an initial budget for this. But Lanson has just become part of that, for sure. The monument and the history, I mean, my God, the associations he must, both difficult and perhaps not always difficult, the associations he must have had with this place called Yale College through all those years. I'm wondering if the Yale archives themselves have been scoured enough on his story. Maybe they have, but we'll find out.
Can I just say that if you're looking for community members, the Amistad Committee, we've got some.
Yes, indeed. I think, yeah.
And Kai, if I could.
Who are you volunteering, Tom?
No, I'm not gonna. I won't volunteer anyone.
All right.
Well, you can volunteer me.
Oh, okay.
Well,
all right.
If you volunteer,
you know,
I'm gonna, hand it off to Chaz, and then he's gonna pass it back to me.
Yeah, as I said, you know, it's
you'll be hearing
the
from
archives of the Dixwell Congregational Church are rich and have well, aside from people like Charles.
I already think our working group needs to hold a meeting over at the Dixwell Church at some point. I mean,
well, we'd be glad to have you for sure. I can
take
tell
a
you
year and a half to do this, by the way. So.
I can tell you that it's not Charles's work over there. That work, there's been a long line of people who've contributed to that. But there's a woman, a New Haven native, and our official church historian, I'm her assistant. Margot Taylor is the woman who has really pieced that archival collection together and has made it what it is today. And there are some awesome things. The history of the Black community and the connection to Yale and enslaved people is directly tied to the institution that is now Dixwell Church. And so I'm sure the church would be glad to work with getting this project off the ground in light of the relationship, especially to people like William Lanson.
Yeah.
But Dana mentioned something about the fist. I want to say it wasn't just artistic license, Dana, that you took with that fist. I guarantee you that William Lanson would have no issue. William Lanson is a man who, with Bias Stanley, another freed Black man, decided to challenge the legislature on Black property-owning men having to pay taxes. They said, you can't tax us and we have no vote. So if you're not gonna let us vote, then absolve us from paying taxes. And they went to an attorney by the last name of Dwight, who submitted a petition, I believe in 1814, to the legislature on behalf of William Lanson, Bias Stanley, and the free property-owning Black men of Connecticut. So I'm sure he'd have no issue, Dana, with that fist being there because he was all about Black power.
No representation, no taxation without representation.
Absolutely.
That was the motto. Yeah, absolutely. You know, this question of the monuments coming down, I think we're grappling with this in the Bay Area. Christopher Columbus and Francis Scott Key and Junipero Serra sculptures were taken down by the public in San Francisco. And you know, there's this rush. I'm sorry?
Name in New Haven, the Christopher Columbus in Worcester Square was taken down.
Yeah, he's coming down everywhere. As people learn the truth of his mission, which was genocide. But anyway, there's this rush to replace these sculptures. And, you know, I do believe that sculpture takes up space and space is power. And I think for this time, we need to leave those plinths empty. I'm going to suggest this to everyone listening. Think about this. Leave them empty, because that space still exists. Mm-hmm. And that space is a place where we can collect as community and have conversations. And we can talk about why those sculptures were there, what they meant, what was the implication of them, why they were taken down, why it took so long. And as community, we can discuss what should replace it, as opposed to institutions deciding whether they be art museums or art commissions or institutions on that level. This is a community conversation that has to happen, and community has to be at the table. So I love that Yale is having this conversation about its involvement with slavery and inviting community to sit at the table. Our voices they're so important to the conversation, and we shouldn't move forward anymore on any level without that access and inclusion of community, because that's how we'll get to equity and diversity. And in all spaces, that's vital that we attempt to do that right now.
I have a viewer question that it's an interesting one. Helen Cowder asks, could the panelists speak about the choice of the site, the process to gain site approval, and also Dana, could you share how those site conditions inform the work, and what is the plan for a plaque or historic information, public education, so maybe Kai, do you want to start off with?
Yeah, I can start, and Charles and Dana, you can just jump in, but a lot of thought went into the site. We wanted to think of the places that, where William Lanson did his most impactful work. I was most excited about having it at Long Wharf. I'll be honest with you. I wanted it at Long Wharf. It's also the site of the home port of the Freedom Schooner Amistad, which is a ship that wouldn't have been able to sail in there either without William Lanson today, right? And so I was really excited about it being right there. And then city officials, the people who know about building public monuments, said because of the salt water, the conditions there, it just wouldn't last.
And traffic. I-95 is such a burden for that.
Right. Well, so we had to let that go. We thought about, could we at least do maybe a plaque there? And we're still thinking about that. There's been even some preliminary discussions about what if we could rename the boathouse in his honor. So we're still thinking about what we can do with that space, because we want people to know that Long Wharf was created by William Lanson. But for the statue, it couldn't be there. So we then started looking along sites along the Farmington Canal Road. And that's how we ended up with this space, which is so largely occupied by Yale University. And so it took a lot of negotiations between the city and Yale and the committee. So,
and I think, Kai, one part that we haven't really discussed is the role of the city of New Haven. Like, this project wouldn't be possible without the city of New Haven. And so it really took work, people in the city plan office, like Mike Piscatelli and the city planner, and there are many people like Aisha Wood and Stacey Davis, who work in that office, who worked on this project for years, Mayor Harp, and Mayor Ellerker. It was a collaborative effort over 2 administrations, but the site choosing really was based on historical connection and the Farmington Canal. Like I said, the 30 miles that goes from the harbor up 30 miles is William Lanson was the, project manager, if you will, and responsible for getting that portion done. Different teams did it all the way up to Northampton, Mass. And so the spot where it's going to be laid on Locke Street is at the Farmington Canal. What would be the canal? It's filled in, obviously, and people can bike and jog and walk. But that site there is a site that William Lanson would have touched with his hands in the hands of his team during his lifetime.
I think
The
it's great that
original
you gave this that kind of historical scrutiny. I really do. I think that's very important, and particularly for young people who go there. They'll realize that this is placed here for a reason, you know.
And there's stone. I'm sorry, Kai. There's stone there that he cut. There's still actual stone that the Lanson team who created the canal, that stone is still there and people can touch it.
And I was going to say, and there was some, some concern among the committee members and the community at large that, well, why would we have this, statue of this Black man, and, so close, right in the middle of like Yale's campus? And, we did want it to be more of in a location where young Black kids can, would congregate. But what I'm hoping is that this is a step in making Yale open up their spaces more to the community and having to realize that Yale and New Haven are one, and so I'm hoping this will invite
Kai,
into.
I don't think it's Yale space, and I want to be clear about that. What I'm saying is, while Yale is around that space, I think the idea should be that we share a space. So yes. I don't look at it as Yale space. I look at it as our space. And so
I don't either. But I'm talking about a lot of community members, a lot of young Black kids in New Haven who do feel like Yale has these iron gates that are kind of closed to them,
Yep.
Which is, it's not true, but
it's partly true. It's partly true.
It can feel that way, right? I read Michelle Obama's book. She talks about how the University of Chicago, how she felt like it had its back to the Black community, right? And so I think this is kind of a step in the right direction for opening up Yale to the community. At least that's what I hope.
Well, it's a symbolic gesture as well. If you look at it, like Lanson has a tie to folks like James Hillhouse and different people who are like the president of Yale at the time Lanson was working on the project, knew William Lanson personally and spoke about his good character. And then you have the canal going right there. You have a historically Black neighborhood of the Dixwell area, not far away, the Dixwell Church, the only institution in existence that is a direct offspring of William Lanson, is not far away. So this is a place where all of the parts, the sum total of William Lanson meets at this place. And so it's the most appropriate spot. But historically, to be accurate, we could have put it in Worcester Square. It would have been historically accurate. William Lanson had property on Green Street, right behind the Worcester Square Park. He purchased land from Mary Worcester. We could have done it on Franklin Street. You could have done it down by the water. There are a million places that William Lanson touched, did business, lived, engaged and affected. You could have done it in the hill on Portsea or Liberty Street, where he lived in the Spireworth neighborhood. So there are a million places in New Haven that William Lanson would have been appropriate to be put. But this place is where a lot of those things come together.
And
He was New Haven.
To first of all, some of the other materials that accompany the statue itself, the other things, and also what kind of educational materials might be associated with it.
With this, so, I'm sorry, Tom, can you ask that again?
Charles, I guess. First of all, there are other components at the site in addition to the statue. There's
The timeline.
Right, and plaques and that. Could you say a little about what those consist of?
Oh, sure. There's definitely going to be something like a biographical plaque about who William Lanson was and what his contributions were. And then there are also plans for other installments, a timeline that kind of goes into detail about the life of William Lanson, and an area that would allow people to sit and reflect and create or be inspired. But there's also at the boathouse down on Long Wharf, there's a timeline that deals with the history of New Haven and the water, and William Lanson's a part of that timeline as well. The Yale Law School has William Lanson materials. The New Haven Museum has William Lanson materials. So there are a number of institutions in the city that have collections relating to William Lanson, and I'm sure, you know, going through the proper channels are accessible.
Dana?
Tom, we have some other questions out there on the Q&A that are kind of, well, anyway, you might just want to have a look.
Yeah, okay. Dana,
I'm trying to send you the the architect's design, because where Mr. Lanson will be for the next year or so, he'll be there by himself. And there is a plaque that describes the things that he did during his lifetime in New Haven. And I love that he could be anywhere in your city, actually, and he would be appropriately placed. But the selection of this site near the walking path along the Farmington Canal and between the Yale Medical Center and the Yale residential facilities, he will be where the stones are located that he carved, and what backbreaking labor that took. But he will be 100 inches above that area of land, which is already 4 feet above the walking path. So as you're walking along the Farmington Canal, you can look up and see Mr. Lanson. But know that the design of that space is just starting. He is the first part of it. Ultimately, Yale is going to produce this informational space about the canal and Mr. Lanson's work, and there'll be seating and landscaping, and the space where he is going to be located come the week of the 21st is at it's a rather oblong shape, which will hold the sculpture and seating and an informational timeline, is the shape of the ships that went down the canal. A greater design in it, which I've just recently noticed for me, it's just me talking, the way that the space is landscaped around that oblong shape where Mr. Lanson will be placed looks to me like a ship. And when I think of that, I think of the slave ships. I think of the bodies that were carried over the Atlantic and stolen from their homelands. And I think of how far Mr. Lanson literally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, metaphorically traveled to get to the point where he was in the 1800s to where we are today, 400 plus years after the first enslaved person was brought to the shores here. And so there is a design within a greater design, as I see it. And that design will come over the next few years. And I encourage Yale to get going on it so that we can have that greater understanding and put him in a physical as well as metaphorical context along the Farmington Canal and towards the Dixwell Church and just in that community with the cemetery across the street.
This is fascinating to me. I'd like to know who you've all been communicating with at Yale and the commitments that Yale has already made on this. This is something I'm going to need to know.
Okay.
Aaron Good in our audience writes in and points out that, I guess from some survey data that the city has done, that over 150,000 trips or people on foot or bicycle or whatever go up that trail through New Haven every year. So that's a lot of people who are going to go right by that monument.
Right.
All the time, and now maybe even more, because it may become an object of school trips, etc. That's a lot of people. I mean, so it sounds like you're in a good place.
I think so.
And before we end things, I do want to let people know that we have a couple of big events coming up at the end of the month on September, what is it, September 24th?
Yeah.
Yes.
We're having a reception at the Boathouse in honor of Dana King. So it'll be really nice having you in town. I think you've gotten some kind of special dispensation to avoid any kind of quarantines or anything like that, although I'm sure you've been good.
I fit in the Homeland Security, category. It's all good.
Okay, good. Yeah, I know this is so, so it will be a public event, but it'll be, limited to a certain number of people. I think 100.
100.
And
this is at the Boathouse down on the wharf, right?
Oh, yeah, the Boathouse down the wharf, the one that we think ought to be the William Lanson Boathouse. Although, so that's going to be on the 24th, and it'll also be broadcast live. And then on Saturday, the 26th, at the site, we'll be dedicating the statue. And again, it'll be 100, limit to 100. That's the kind of COVID-19 standards that are set by Connecticut and the city of New Haven, masks and all that. But it too will be broadcast live. So we really encourage those of you who are interested and want to keep following this story to stay tuned. We'll have information about that. And it'll be wonderful to meet you, Dana. Do you want to say something?
Thank you. Can I just add one thing? I'm sorry. Your mayor, Mayor Elliker, in his wisdom, is going to do what this country hasn't done for African descendants. And he's going to apologize to William Lanson. He's going to pardon William Lanson for the specious charges that were trumped up against him and that put him in jail and ended up taking all of his property, and where he ultimately died in a poorhouse. Your mayor is going to do what this country needs to do. And that's to start the conversation around reparations and around harm and violence and police brutality, and he's going to apologize. And I'm so grateful for him stepping into that space to do that.
And
I wish that there were.
Just in some historical context, William Lanson ended up dying broke in the New Haven almshouse because the powers that be from the city government, the police department, the tax assessor, basically harassed him and trumped up charges. He was in jail a lot. He was in court, often paying court fees, and he ended up going broke behind this sort of conspiracy to erase him. And what Mayor Elliker is going to do is officially pardon William Lanson for those crimes that he was accused of, because they were baseless and, levied with intent to harm.
Wow.
That's incredible.
I wonder if Yale had had a hand in any of those prosecutions. We need to find that out.
Oh, yes, we do. There's actually a number of historical questions that have come up,
Oh, yeah.
including a question about the petition against unjust taxation. Marian
Yes.
Sarkiva is interested. What came of that? Charles?
They were still paying. I think they were still paying taxes. I don't think anything came of it. The petition was sort of denied, and so those men still pay taxes.
Right. And also someone is asking about educational tours becoming available for Lanson sites, maybe to identify Lanson sites. And I will say, and again, Charles is with the Connecticut Freedom Trail, and this will be a part of the Freedom Trail, but are there, movements to kind of identify some of these other kind of historic sites in New Haven, or the location, at least, of those places?
Some of them are known. The Freedom Trail doesn't have right now like staffed touring, but we've always had volunteers, people who work with the Freedom Trail. Amistad Committee Vice President Roz Hamilton oftentimes gave tours of Freedom Trail sites. And so if people are interested, we can definitely set something up on an individual basis to make, if people are interested in groups or whatever. We would gladly try to educate and inform the community. Absolutely.
And also I see that Sandra Clark is on the call, is here. And we work with her with the Amistad Committee. She's the Director of Social Studies for New Haven Public Schools. So I am sure she will be giving us a call right after this to organize school trips.
And by the way, Aaron Good also sent us a link here, which is all about the location of the Lanson Plaza, the site. So, and we had a question earlier from Lou DeBacco, one of our own team, about he asked for someone to put up a map of this. Well, this link, I think, will help too. So you can go, if you're on the call right now, you can go to the Q&A. There's a link right there, or we can certainly put it also on our website.
And someone else asks for information about where to register for the events that are coming up, and those will be available on the Gilder Lehrman Center's website and Facebook, and the City of New Haven is also doing quite a bit to promote and support those events as well.
Anyone who can save a link in the chat here to those flyers? I was trying to while we were talking, but.
Oh, I wonder if Daniel could put it in before we get off. But we also can announce all of this in our weekly newsletter. And frankly, if any of you out there in the community are not yet on our newsletter, we put it out every week. Tom actually produces it with some help from Daniel. You should email us. Just email me or Tom Thurston at Yale, and we will hook you up. You will then know about all of our events, whether you want to or not.
or if you're interested and just want to subscribe, go ahead and put your email address in the comments, and I'll sign you up.
Yeah, just do it. That's the easiest way. And we will be announcing this unveiling and that reception on our newsletter as well as our website. But we send that newsletter out every week. So.
And Tom, on behalf of the Amistad Committee, I'd like to thank the Gilder Lehrman Center and Dr. David and Dr. Michelle and Daniel and you, Tom, and the whole team over there.
And Melissa, who's our graphic artist.
Absolutely, Melissa.
Been doing some fantastic work as well. Thanks so much. And it's like, it's really great, this collaboration. It's wonderful working with the Amistad Committee, and here's to many more fantastic projects that we can work together on. Well, someone has a good question, Magdalene Moore, and this is kind of roundabout, but how did Lanson, how do you think his work, his efforts influenced the Great Migration, the movement of African Americans to New Haven? Now, I guess I could say, in some ways, by being an engine to the economic vitality of New Haven, is that building that Long Wharf and all the other, infrastructural development that he was responsible made, manufacturing, and by providing housing for African American people meant that there were places to come to. And another thing,
shipping goods.
Yeah, shipping goods.
Oh.
The oyster industry at New Haven was a major center of the oyster industry for years and years and years. Ultimately killed off by I-95, I think.
A hotel, right?
Well, think about the huge population of people from Nevis in New Haven. A lot of Caribbeans are amongst New Haven's Black population, and you can see early on with people like John Creed, who was a man who was a contemporary of William Lanson's, and also the father of Yale's first Black medical school graduate. He came from the Caribbean to New Haven. And so there are a lot of folks who were coming in through Long Wharf. Also, William Lanson was pivotal in the Underground Railroad, providing work, providing housing for those people who had fled the South. And, the monetary arm of the Underground Railroad, a lot of times were established, prominent white people in town, the Jocelyn, Trowbridges, very influential folks in New Haven who I'm sure helped to get the word out and shepherd more folks into New Haven and through New Haven on the Underground Railroad.
Larry Laconey writes in and says, is there a good book on Lanson? Is there a book out on Lanson?
The best work that I've seen is a book on the life of William Lanson by Dr. Catherine Harris. It's actually commissioned by the Amistad Committee. And if anyone's interested in getting a copy of that, just contact, you can message Tom and send a message, and we will make sure that you can get a copy.
And we'll also have copies for sale at the
dedication. Yes.
Right. And it's a great
too. So
it's a great resource. It has lots of primary documents and that sort of thing. So it's a great resource for classroom teaching if you're a teacher, but also if you're interested in exploring New Haven and finding more about kind of historic Black New Haven. And I think another thing I'd like to add is that William Lanson, his life is an example of that our history, and I think we know this by now, is not a kind of unbroken progress, a history of unbroken progress. When he was a young man, African Americans in New Haven and Connecticut did have the right to vote if they were property. That right was taken away from them in 1819 by a new state constitution, that right to vote. And it's a reminder that we always need to be struggling to make sure that these rights remain with us, and especially in this day and age. And so it's something to think about. Is it the reason history moves forward is because of the work of people like William Lanson is making it move forward. We need to keep that struggle going.
Yeah,
well, it's so common. Go ahead.
Another conversation maybe, because I was really hoping to talk to Dana more about African Americans in the maritime industry, because this is another connection that I think is so important to talk about, and that William Lanson has a clear connection to. I have a connection to. I know there's work being done at Mystic Seaport to start to acknowledge African Americans in the maritime industry. So maybe we can think about that for a future conversation. And
well, you will have a partner in that in our associate director, Michelle Zacks, because maritime history is her field. She may have already told you that. But.
Yes.
And there's been more and more good historical work on Black New Haven that's happening in Connecticut, and more is going to be happening because just recently the state of Connecticut has mandated the teaching of an elective course in Black and Latino history on the part of all the public schools in Connecticut. Some over 400 public schools. They're going to be involved in developing professional workshops on that. And this is a history of, you know, the African Americans and Latino people in the United States. But, you know, local history is important. That's what, you know, young people can wrap their heads around sometimes, is that what's happening, you know, across the nation is happening right here in our neighborhoods. And so I expect that there is going to be a blossoming of research and materials created as a result of this kind of new interest in the histories of people whose histories have been marginalized.
You know, Tom, we probably should wrap up, although we've lost almost no one from our audience, which is amazing. It's great.
Yeah, we probably should, but keep in touch, everyone. David, you want to say?
Yeah, I'll just say a goodbye and a thank you, Dana and Charles and Kai and Tom, you, of course, and all of our audience out there. Thank you for joining in. And I hope you've realized here that at least at our center, and certainly other elements of this great university here, we are part of this community. We want to be part of this community. My approach here at the Gilder Lehrman, our approach here at the Gilder Lehrman Center, is to do what Yale can do best, which is create knowledge and teach, but then to take it outside of our boundaries, you know, out to the world and out to this community. So that's what this is about ultimately. And I can't wait to see you all in person in a week after next at the reception and at the unveiling. Yes. And by the way, there's even a link, somebody put a link on here to the Catherine Harris book. We got a lot of links here. This is great.
Good.
This is good. We'll accumulate these and we'll stick those up on the newsletter too. So anyway, thank you all for doing this. Thank you all for coming.
Yeah.
And,
thanks for all your questions. Sorry we didn't get them all, but it's great to see how engaged people are in this project. And again, you know, thanks to all our panelists, and have a wonderful day.
And Dana, have a good, safe, masked flight from California.
Yes.
Thank you.